This newscast is brought to you by Qbert, Pittsburgh's source for LGBTQ+ news and community information. To learn more about Qbert, go to their website, qbert.com. From the PEP Radio Newsroom, these are the stories we are covering at this hour. President Trump may soon be unveiling a whole host of new initiatives that will strike at the core of education, the wars in Ukraine and Israel, tariffs and tax cuts, and an attack on federal labor laws. We start first with his plans for education. On the one hand, the 2024 Republican platform promised to return education to the states, but the document, boosted by Trump's statements, also promises universal school choice, meaning to use the power of the federal government to implement private school tuition subsidies and end teaching tenure, job protections usually defined at the state level. Additionally, Trump declared that parents of school children should be able to hire and fire principals, decisions typically made by local school superintendents and school boards. Trump did not detail how he would accomplish such national uniformity in K-12 schools, but in general, his education ideas would make federal money conditional, and the administration's opening week suggests the White House believes it can use executive power to do that rather than go through Congress. As for universities and colleges, in Agenda 47 and at rallies, candidate Trump described U.S. colleges and universities as havens for Marxist maniacs and lunatics. Trump proposed taking over the independent accreditation process for higher education institutions, calling that his secret weapon to transform the system. He took aim at higher education endowments, promising to collect billions and billions of dollars from schools via taxing, fining, and suing excessively large private university endowments at schools that do not comply with his edicts, like his crackdown on diversity initiatives. Trump did not name schools in Agenda 47, but many well-regarded private universities hold endowments exceeding $10 billion, and the oldest Ivy League institutions, Harvard and Yale, measure theirs in the tens of billions. Of course, trying to commandeer private endowments would invite court fights, since they are legally protected funds from donors. As for tariffs, Trump has imposed tariffs on China, which responded with its own levies. But there is a pause on border levies on goods from Mexico and Canada. Beyond that initial foray into the president's promised protectionism, Trump promised as a candidate to pursue the Trump Reciprocal Trade Act in Congress to reverse U.S. trade deficits and goose domestic production. He also called for baseline tariffs without making clear whether he meant through executive action or legislation. Trump more recently hailed the late 19th and early 20th century era when the federal government relied heavily on tariff revenue before the income tax era began with the 16th Amendment's ratification in 1913. That era, however, also predates Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and the Pentagon being responsible for the world's most expensive military. Trump has explicitly promised to protect all those big-ticket items other than Medicaid. The president's talk of tariff revenue aside, he has pledged a return of policies in the Republicans' sweeping 2017 overhaul. That package reached nearly every U.S. household, added but concentrated benefits among corporations and the wealthiest individual filers. Trump added 2024 campaign promises to exempt tips, Social Security benefits, and overtime pay from income taxes. Congress is still contemplating tax changes. Given these tariffs and taxes and the impact they will have on the economy, what then are Trump's plans for labor and industry? Despite Trump's promise on overtime wages, conservatives have separate ideas that would reduce the instances U.S. workers get overtime pay in the first place. Project 2025 calls for rescinding Biden administration rules that sought to expand qualifications for time and a half overtime for about 4 million workers. The document also would curtail Biden-era rules that make it easier for gig economy workers, rideshare drivers, for example, to gain benefits as full-time employees rather than contract workers with fewer protections under labor law. including the standard 40-hour workweek threshold that triggers overtime pay. More broadly, Project 2025 calls for weakening the Fair Labor Standards Act and National Labor Relations Act, seminal laws from Franklin Delano Roosevelt's presidency. The authors want Congress to authorize collective bargaining to treat national employment laws and regulations as negotiable defaults and allow waivers for states and local governments to encourage experimentation and reform efforts. Proposing looser safety rules, Project 2025 would make it easier for teenagers to work dangerous jobs and harder for the Occupational Safety and Health Administration to investigate conditions and impose penalties on private sector businesses. And finally, as for the wars in Ukraine and Israel, hyperbole or not, Trump insisted repeatedly as a candidate that he would quickly settle the war in Ukraine brought about by Russia's invasion and the Israel-Hamas war spawned by Hamas's slaughter of Israeli civilians on October 7th, 2023. The Biden administration, with Trump transition team involvement, negotiated a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. But there's no permanent peace accord in place, and Trump has complicated matters with his musings about a U.S. takeover of Gaza to turn it into the Riviera of the Middle East. On Ukraine, Trump also said, "I will ask Europe to reimburse us for the cost of rebuilding the stockpiles sent to Ukraine." He recently suggested Ukraine should reimburse the U.S. with access to its rare earth minerals as part of an agreement to continue military support against the Russian invasion. We will be watching closely the actions the Trump administration takes and show how these changes will impact the LGBTQ+ and other marginalized communities. Be sure to download the Live 365 app to take PEP Radio with you wherever you go. If you are watching our videos on YouTube, you be sure to click the subscribe button. That's the news at this hour. Now back to more music on PEP Radio.